Thank you, Marietta. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining. As Marietta said, I work within TÜV SÜD as the Wireless Certification Manager, as well as a subject matter expert for North America and Japan radio certification. So today, you will receive a summary of the key points from a large update received last month from ICID Canada and the FCC. So we'll cover all of the topics you see listed on this slide, which is tailored with equipment manufacturers in mind. So you will have the information needed to ensure that your products can comply with relevant rules as they come into effect, and to enable you to bring your products to market in time. So we will also end by providing a bit of initial important information on a new requirement for manufacturers of IoT products, and that is in relation to cybersecurity, new cybersecurity laws. So let's start by looking at ICID Canada. Now, the ICID Canada presentation from the ICID Canada group was cancelled. So there are just a few updates for standards I will mention. So firstly, we have an update on RSS 181, issue 2 for coast ship equipment in the 1605 to 28,000 kilohertz band, which was published in August. They did modernize the technical requirements within this to harmonize with international standards in about February of this year. And they published an amendment where they made a minor change in the term from carrier frequency to channel frequency. And they've added a definition of that channel frequency. RSS 222 covers white space devices, and an issue 2 was published in January, and they've updated the technical rules based on the white space device framework decision. And within the standard, there are some new frequency bands that have been assigned, so that's one update there. For RSS HAC, that is the radio standard for hearing aid compatibility, issue 1 was published in March. However, the test lab recognition requirement has been extended by ICID Canada until July of 2020. But manufacturers must ensure that radio that fall under this standard is compliant with the requirements of this standard no later than January 1st of 2024. For ISIS 003, it's at issue 7 for a draft. This is a standard that covers ITE, information technology equipment, as well as digital apparatus. It is at the draft stage, and ICID are seeking comments by July the 3rd. So that was all for Canada. Now we'll look at FCC updates, starting with general administrative updates. And the first update is in relation to recently published knowledge database publications, in short form KDB publications. So here's a list of some of them, and in terms of the KDB publications that were recently put online, 6 were updated, and the first you see here in the list, the first 2 are brand new. And these first 2 are designed with the general public in mind. That's KDB 772105 and 997198. And the FCC received many inquiries about devices that are exempt from certification. There is a rule part 15.103, which has caused some confusion to the public. So these 2 documents are basically online to help the general public determine what devices can be exempt from assessment. So the main updates made otherwise were in KDB 285076, which covers hearing aid compatibility, as well as the KDB 388624, which covers pre-approval guidance, PAG. These have been revised with more clarification on how to reuse a PAG. They've added more data on how to reuse test data for filings, and they've added in the HAC KDB PAG reuse related question. There's a new rule they allowed a while back about reusing pre-approval guidance permissions that they've provided in the past. KDB 842590 relates to Part 30, has been updated as well. We'll cover that later. And there's also the booster KDB 935210. There were some minor changes there. They basically have change notices added within this KDB, which helps with tracking the changes that have been made in the KDB over time. So next, some administrative reminders. And the first reminder relates to the difference in process between reuse of a pre-approval guidance process versus an original PAG process. So a PAG is where the FCC involvement is needed for a device where the rules still need FCC oversight. And basically, we need their approval, the FCC's approval, before we can grant the equipment as a TCB. So here they basically remind that if an applicant wants to reuse an old PAG, which was approved by the FCC, it's necessary for us, the TCB, to enter a PAG tracking number and submit an inquiry to the FCC to request PAG reuse approval. But then in future applications, we notify that the device was granted after being approved for a reuse. And the next topic, if there are multiple PAGs for one device, like for example, a device has SAR, it has Part 30, Part 96, maybe hearing aid compatibility, they have to be submitted in one PAG inquiry. So all of these topics merged in one. There's only one field in the form that we fill out online for the inquiry. So instead of having items sent one after another for each PAG topic applicable to the device, where the officers would normally review one after another, they're trying to have things done in parallel. And so basically, in order to allow this, all items need to be included in one PAG inquiry. So this information is for you to be aware of. So the FCC are trying to improve the PAG processing time with these type of measures. For post-grant confidentiality, that's confidentiality requests from applicants after a grant has been issued, the grantee does need to supply a letter to us to state that the grantee was aware that the information was made public. So short-term post-grant confidentiality also cannot be past 180 days from the grant date. That's an FCC rule. So they want to remind everyone that a reason is required to make changes to the grant after approved, and the FCC will not allow changes that are not pertinent to the grant. For example, model name changes. The final reminder is that if an applicant wants a grant dismissed voluntarily for whatever reasons, they must confirm via letter that the products have never been sold anywhere and labeled with that FCC ID. Next, we'll look at spectrum proceedings, which is of interest to manufacturers, of course, and we'll look briefly at Part 15 waivers, which is a very popular rule part for equipment approval. Just to show you some of the activities that were done in that space recently. So the FCC 5G Fast Plan, so these are the types of initiatives the FCC is working on to implement the 5G Fast Plan for spectrum. In the high band spectrum, the FCC recently had a spectrum auction for high band frequencies. And there are also activities in the mid-band, low band, and unlicensed spectrum as well. So they are making more spectrum available for 5G. So we'll take a quick overview of items the FCC has worked on related to this. And with their Spectrum Frontiers initiative, the FCC aims to deliver high spectrum frequency in the USA as well. So here you can see some of the bands on the left that the FCC have reallocated for mobile type use, and also unlicensed bands as well. And service rules are covered. So this was a hot item that was just adopted in the Commission meeting in February. This is a 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band. So we're getting inquiries on this. They're making more mid-band spectrum available within this band. So they call this the C-band, and it was before allocated for fixed services. But the FCC released a report and order in February, and some of the changes included things like addition of mobile allocation in the lower part of the band, That's the 3.7 to 4 gigahertz band. And then of that spectrum, 280 megahertz has been transitioned to flexible use through public auction. And so they are requiring fixed satellite service operations to relocate to the top portion of that band. That's 4 to 4.2 gigahertz. And the fixed service licensees have to leave this band according to the FCC's date. So the FCC have adopted service and technical rules for flexible use licensees in the 280 megahertz spectrum designated for transition to flexible use. So these are new bands, so there's new rules, and we will see equipment coming in these bands. And on April 23rd, the FCC adopted the rules into the Federal Register, and the rules are effective on June 22nd. So Spectrum Horizons is an order that the FCC adopted last year. This is for high-frequency unlicensed use above 95 gigahertz. And in that proceeding, a total of 21 gigahertz of spectrum was allocated for unlicensed use, as shown here. These are rules that are similar to 60 gigahertz device rules. So the FCC adopted a new experimental license for the high frequencies above 95 gigahertz. They also extended the license terms and added the ability to sell devices, which was previously not allowed before with experimental licenses. So the 6 gigahertz unlicensed band, the 6 gigahertz band, this is also a hot item. There was a report and order scheduled and a further NPRM scheduled for the FCC vote last month. And this makes 1,200 megahertz spectrum available for unlicensed devices in the 6 gigahertz band. In fact, yesterday, these 6 gigahertz UNII rules were published in the Federal Register. So the rules are effective from July 27th. And so basically in the 5.925 to 6.425 gigahertz band and the 6.525 to 6.875 gigahertz band, access points can transmit indoors and outdoors under control of an automated frequency coordination system at power levels that are permitted in the 5 gigahertz band. In the 5.925 to 6.425 gigahertz band, they allow higher power outdoor access points to operate up to 36 dBm ERP under the control of a database system. And then in the 5.925 to 7.125 gigahertz band, unlicensed access points can operate at lower power without an automated frequency coordination system, but those would be restricted to indoor use only. Finally, they do also now permit very low power operation across the entire 6 gigahertz band, both indoor and outdoor use. So below the 6 gigahertz band, there is the DSRC band for vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communications. There's 75 megahertz of spectrum from 5.85 to 5.925 gigahertz. And the FCC adopted a notice last December, and comments for this was closed April 27th. The item here proposes to reallocate the lower 45 megahertz of the band, that's 5.85 to 5.895 gigahertz, for unlicensed use. The upper 30 megahertz would still be for vehicle transportation communications and would permit cellular vehicle-to-everything operation in the upper 20 megahertz of the band. That's 5.905 to 5.925 gigahertz. They do seek comment on what to allow in the other 10 megahertz for DSRC systems, or whether it should be dedicated for cellular vehicle-to-everything use. The next item is for white space devices. The FCC adopted a notice of proposed rulemaking on white spaces in February in response to a petition by Microsoft. This item would propose to make changes for white space devices in the TV bands. That's TV channels 2 to 35 And here they propose to increase the maximum fixed device power for white space devices from 10 watts to 16 watts EIRP in basically where they know are less congested areas where basically half of the channels are vacant. They also propose to increase the maximum antenna height of average terrain for fixed devices from 250 meters to 500 meters to improve coverage in rural areas. And this item would allow higher power mobile operations within areas where the available frequencies are known. They propose new rules for narrowband IoT devices operating in TV bands 2 to 35. Okay, so this slide and the next slide provides information on some of the current Part 15 waiver activity. And as background, the FCC grants applicants a waiver of a specific rule requirement based on a good cause to waive a specific rule. Basically, where the FCC determines that the request warrants further consideration, they release a public notice for public comment. They will then grant or deny the applicant's request based upon review of the entire record. But if granted, a copy of the granted waiver is provided to the TCB when submitting the application for certification. So here I just wanted to provide some of the examples of recent waivers that have been granted and some that have been received at the FCC and being reviewed, so you can see what sort of items are being requested to waive by manufacturers. And these are all viewable on the FCC website. The first two on the left are motion sensing devices, and here they seek waiver of a power requirement. There's the Google waiver and a 32 Technologies waiver that was granted already. There's two detection security screening waivers open for Roden Swartz and Liberty Defense. And on the right, you can see some open waivers for ground penetrating radar equipment for Robert Bosch, Zebra Technologies, and WaveSense. The last two are for Leica and GSSI, which are seeking waiver of onboard aircraft restriction and allowance for marketing up to 2,000 evaluation kits. So next we will look at LTE carrier aggregation rule updates. So over the past few years, the FCC has made several presentations at the past workshops on LTE carrier aggregation, and they had slides within their presentations relating to RF exposure for carrier aggregation. So a list of all of the presentations where there's been LTE carrier aggregation guidance is provided on this slide. And where the presentations are bolded, this indicates that these are key guidance presentations. For example, April 2015, November 2017, April 2018. In these presentations, different types of carrier aggregation were covered, including interband, intraband, contiguous, non-contiguous, downlink, and uplink carrier aggregations, all of these topics. The latest FCC KDB guidance document is KDB 941225D05A, published October 2015. So it was a while ago. It was written for LTE Release 10. And at the present time, we're now several releases beyond LTE Release 10. And so the FCC know that an update to the guidance is necessary. As for the current LTE carrier aggregation guidance, the general guidance in the KDB is still valid. The November 2017, April and October 2018 slides present the latest guidance on LTE carrier aggregation. But if the guidance in the presentations do not cover your device, and it's not covered in a KDB 941225D05A, you should submit a KDB inquiry, especially for new releases of LTE and new features that are not covered by the guidance. But the presentations for October 2018 and November 2019 can be used to determine if a PAG is required for that LTE CA. So what are the FCC's next steps? They are developing guidance for later LTE releases. With the current KDB publication guidance document, it was written for release 10, and so guidance needs to be developed for later releases, as well as to cover 5G carrier aggregation. And a new KDB publication or an update to the existing KDB to reflect new guidance will take place, so the PAG list will need to be updated accordingly. So next we'll look at RF exposure policy updates. What we look at in this RF exposure policy procedure update, the main item we're looking at here is FCC 19-126 rulemaking. So the FCC have a rulemaking item 19-126, which was first released on April 1st on the FCC webpage. The final rules were under a rulemaking docket, which started back in 2003. Then in 2013, rulemaking, they presented formulas for SAR exemptions. So now they're being put into effect with this Federal Register release. The published version they have has minimal changes to what was proposed originally in 2013. Some highlights of that second report and order are provided here. So these are some of the main topics. But the exemption formulas are incorporated into Rule Part 1.1307 for mobile and portable sections. It is stated in the rulemaking documents, which means that the basic KDB 447.498 has been updated. Also, OET 65 has quite a few updates, the bulletin, and the rulemaking addresses environmental evaluations. The key points clarify that alternative computational software needs to be fully validated. So this will be in the KDB and bulletin as well. There's also this old 5-centimeter evaluation distance for portables above 6 gigahertz. That has been removed from Rule Part 2.1093. That was actually not up to date with the FCC's more modern rules that they've had in the past 10 years. So the report and order contains mitigation measures relating to fixed sites and access restrictions and different levels of mitigation and signage requirements. So a lot of other rule parts have conforming edits to align with all these changes that they're making. So the date of effectivity for the RF exposure rules is June 1st of 2020. The exemption formulas and the removal of the former categorical exclusions all go into effect June 1st under Rule Part 1.1307b. There is another date to come for the mobile and portable device rule changes. Extra guidance will be provided by the FCC for the dates and periods on those, and there is a 2-year transition period for these rules to allow the manufacturers to adopt to the new rules and to allow the FCC to update their guidance documents. So there is a 2-year transition period before mandating that. So this is a view of an example table from the existing KDB 447.498 document. This is for RF exposure, the general KDB. And in this, we see on the left column the frequency in megahertz, and the top row is distance in millimeters. Power levels shown in blue would be the new SAR exclusion power levels per the new rules. And what we see is the SAR exemption power levels are lower than before at higher frequencies over 835 megahertz. And at smaller separations to users, you'll see that there's a lower SAR exemption power level. But at separation distances of 25 millimeters or more, the exemption power level is going higher in comparison to the old levels shown in black. So on April 6th, the Federal Register published the proposed rule section. They sought comment on topics such as whether there should be any other limit changes or nerve stimulation limits needed, whether upper ranges should be extended, as well as wireless power transfer devices as well. So they have been working since November to address evolving devices such as sub-6 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz devices. So a lot of updates for the KDBs are hinged on this RF exposure rulemaking, and the FCC do not have any major changes in the policies and publications right now. What they have been doing for the past few months is continuing to use existing guidance unless otherwise notified. But the FCC will change threshold values in the KDB 447498, as well as evaluation and reporting conditions. So everything must have an RF exposure statement, an exemption, measurement, or MPE estimate. And the FCC will provide more exemption guidance on that. They're also collating and updating, making more procedures regarding millimeter wave devices. So they're making consideration on past pre-approval guidance cases they've had, and they're working with the IEEE IEC committee. And a lot of this is based on FCC testing that has been performed in the past. So next we look briefly at a couple of updates relating to ANSI C63 series of standards. First we have C63.4, which covers unintentional radiators. In April 2019, they released a notice to include an amendment of the standard into the rules. And the comment and reply to comment has been closed, and they're currently under FCC review, and the Commission has not taken action on the proposal, so this is still pending. They are revising the standard, but the work is progressing quite quickly on this, and a motion was made in December to forward the revised draft from subcommittee to the parent committee. So the end of the year is the expected time frame for publishing of the standard. So C63.10 focuses on compliance measurements for unlicensed wireless devices. The working group has been busy formulating responses to interpretations and loop antenna orientations, for example. So the draft was approved March 31st, and there is a revision to the standard which is scheduled to be submitted for reballot and should be published by the end of the year. C63.26 focuses on licensed transmitters, and work on revising the original 2015 standard is progressing through the millimeter task group, and they're putting together guidance for new Part 30 rules. There is a signal booster task group, and that group is looking to expand test requirements to include additional bands. The original 2015 version did have a sophisticated set of procedures for signal boosters. For C63.29, lighting products, the working group for that topic is currently in the process of finalizing procedures for setting up LED driver tests and how to configure the devices, load them to perform the test. So they are finalizing procedures for compliance testing of dimmer switches, and they have two procedures suggested in the standard, one for testing with the TRIAC enabled and one with it disabled. So the idea is to allow the regulator to choose which of these procedures is to be used to demonstrate compliance to the particular rule part. And this is expected to be done in the third quarter of this year. So next we'll look at the Citizens Broadband Radio Service devices in Part 96 and the changes in the equipment authorization requirements. There's some relaxations that make things a little bit easier for manufacturers and TCBs here. So one major change is that the CBSDs which operate as a category A and B can now be filed under one FCC ID, so separate authorizations are not required. So the FCC knew this was a burden on manufacturers where there were identical hardware within the devices, and the only difference was the software or the antenna gain. So this rule allows more flexibility in the filing, so the manufacturers can have one SKU for their device if they choose to associate with the FCC ID. This relies on the Certified Professional Installer, CPI, in providing accurate information at the time of the install. So they removed Part 96 devices from the PAG list. So this is a big change here. It should make the approval time faster. So base stations and end user devices no longer require a PAG in order for a TCB to approve the grant. So testing at the FCC lab is also not required. So in terms of the classification category B, the FCC certification allows a common ID to be shared among multiple CBSDs if they're configured with the same power amplifier and have different antennas, including, as I said, those that fall under both categories. They'll require FCC grants to reflect the maximum EIRP for all antenna configurations. And if a CBSD certification shows a max EIRP higher than 30 dBm, it means that the CBSD has at least one Category B configuration and should always be installed by a certified professional installer, even if it uses a lower gain antenna for Category A. So if a CBSD certification shows a max EIRP of less than or equal to 30 dBm, the CBSD can be registered as Category A. The next, self-registrations of a base station without an installer. A SAS should only accept a self-registration from a CBSD without a certified professional installer for indoor deployment or outdoors where there's less than 6-meter antenna height, if they can verify the following two items. And that is that the CBSD is Category A, capable of geolocation, meeting the FCC Rule Part 96.39 rules, which is verified during certification. And then that the verification is consistent, follows a process defined by an industry forum, such as WinForum or CBRS Alliance. But most devices are professionally installed because most of them don't meet the geolocation requirements. But in all cases involving like the certified professional installer, they will calculate the maximum EIRP of the CBSD and thereby determine its category. So that EIRP calculation is based on the maximum non-adjusted conducted power of the power amplifier used for out-of-band emissions testing, as well as taking into consideration the gains from the antennas or losses from cables and splitters. This provides determination as to whether it's Category A or B for those devices that wish to be certified as both. So there's an update on the KDB publication 662911 for MIMO. And in the last webinar, we covered the FCC's proposal to allow measurement instead of theoretical calculation of directional gain of multiple antenna systems. So the FCC have provided an update on this. And we covered this before, where we said that directional gain of device for antenna system becomes relevant to compliance testing when the limit on the output power density becomes dependent on directional gain, or where conducted measurement plus directional gain is used to demonstrate compliance with the radiated limits. So the FCC have a KDB publication 662911, which describes a method to calculate directional gain of a multi-antenna system. But whereas the FCC know this method may overestimate the actual gain, so they're proposing to permit an alternative method to use appropriate antenna gain measurement results instead of theoretical calculations. So they're going to provide a complementary guidance document, complementary KDB to like the 662911 series, which will be published to address how they want the measurement to be performed. But approval is on a case-by-case basis, so it's subject to PAG, and their plan was to publish it by April 30th. However, it's not yet published. So for the antenna gain measurement, the FCC provided their requirements and expectations, and they basically stated that when submitting antenna gain measurement results, the following three items should be addressed in the PAG filing. So that is identification of the measurement environment, such as like type of chambers, the effective operating range of the measurement instrumentation. A fully anechoic chamber must be used for antenna gain measurements. And then the measurement method used shall need to be described. For example, is it far field or near field measurements? And then clearly defined measurement quantity, as in, is it measurement of gain, directivity, or radiation pattern? But most systems will deal with advanced antenna systems with beam forming or beam steering. And in that case, the FCC are looking for specific configurations that represent the beams with maximum directivity, and those have to be identified and measured. They also require defining the limits of the steering of the beam. If the beam is steerable, and the extent of the steering capability also has to be defined. So next we'll look at some Part 30 updates. In terms of Part 30, there are about 50 applications, just over that the FCC has approved, that we have approved to date. But to perform out-of-band and spurious emission compliance testing, the C63 millimeter wave group recommends three methods that are shown there. The ANSI C63 millimeter wave joint task group is drafting a test procedure for measuring unwanted emissions based on total radiated power measured. So they reviewed published KDBs and made revisions. The millimeter wave KDB 842590 was originally published in 2019, and this was revised and published last month. The next step in the task group is to study the use of alternative test sites, primarily to make total radiated power measurements. And two alternative sites considered are the compact antenna range site and the reverberation chamber. So some technical content was revised and clarifications were made within the KDB. Radiated EIRP measurement is used for in-band power density measurement, unwanted emission measurement, and with a TRP. And in all three cases, it's assumed that a linearly polarized measurement receive antenna is used. But measurements are recorded over two orthogonal cross polarizations. But in cases A and B, there is no need to sum the measurements across the two polarizations. So the FCC, for out-of-band emission measurements, they do allow EIRP to conducted power conversion method to be used, which allows for the radiated EIRP measurement to be done, and then subtract the known antenna gains from it to arrive at theoretical conducted power. And this method is limited to band edge of Part 30 devices. So the third method, the indirect radiated EIRP minus the antenna gain, this method is only allowed for the band edge of Part 30 devices. And as applicable to Part 30 devices, the use of that method is only allowed at the band edge and is subject to a few conditions. But the FCC say that a more comprehensive way of performing unwanted emissions testing would be using the TRP measurement method. And if the radiated EIRP measurement results do not meet the unwanted emission limits, then the TRP measurements are performed. So TRP measurements can be performed anywhere in the unwanted emission domain, not limited to the spurious domain. But they found that a few applications use this method, mainly through the two-cut method as described in the KDB publication for millimeter wave device procedures, 842590. But next, here the FCC has provided a method for reducing compliance testing for multiple antenna systems. So most of the advanced antenna system technology the FCC has been supporting beam forming or beam steering and similar things. So in those cases, there appears to be a common practice for phased array antenna systems with subarrays. What they found is that if the subarrays are identical, and again, they could be anything from 4 to 256 elements per subarray, but if they're found to be identical, there's no need to make measurements of each subarray. So if using multiple subarrays to make one radiating beam, the total power shall need to be calculated due to the radiation contribution from all arrays. So assuming the multiple antenna system dictates the far field of the antennas to be greater than or too great to make the measurements in the semi-anechoic chamber, the FCC allows EARP measurements on individual subarrays as opposed to the whole array of the system. So in that case, the FCC would require the total power, EIRP or TRP, to be summed across all those subarrays per polarization to arrive at the total power. So the FCC Equipment Authorization System is estimated to be released before October. The FCC provided an extensive 2-hour discussion on this topic, but we'll look at the main key update, key changes for you as a manufacturer so you're ready to go when the system comes online. The current Equipment Authorization System manages all entities, forms, and the KDB inquiry system. The new system is a complete redesign of their system and user access interfaces. All of the existing EAS data will be migrated to the new platform. There are minor policy changes that will be needed to accommodate the changes they're making in their system and allow the FCC to better manage the program. But the look of the system and feel, they say, will be very different. And the FCC do have in place a database and website modernization plan. They shall review existing EAS processes with a goal to improve and streamline and implement EAS changes to account for all equipment authorization policy and procedural changes that are not programmed into the current system. But they will be implementing a standardized login process. So in terms of terminology, the platform is called ServiceNow, or SNOW. The new external user website is known as Portal. The new EAS login and password is going to be known as username and is an email address. And there's a commission registration system, abbreviated called CORS, which is used to obtain and manage usernames. The website URLs for the new EAS system will be different. So all user access will be on the same landing page, but based on which entity a user is associated with, depending on who's looking at the page, you'll see different options. So the general public will see a landing page with links, but they will not see any pull-down menus, for example. So grantee processes, this is for the manufacturer. The new EAS allows for multiple users and usernames to be associated with each grantee company. So agents can be associated with grantees as well. And agents can obtain the grantee code on behalf of the grantee. So TCB can still obtain grantee codes on behalf of the grantee. We basically select an agent checkbox and make ourselves an agent contact for the grantee. There is an option for modify grantee information. This will be accessible under Manage Filings pull down using the link from Manage My Entities. So yeah, all of these grantee user, TCB user may modify the grantee information if they were the ones that obtained the grantee code. The pre-approval guidance procedure is submitted completely via the online form. And it's not like the form and the KDB inquiry separately, it's within one. So the new EAS allows for multiple TCBs, the grantee, test firm, agents, all of them to be associated with that Form 731. And all contacts are required to have an FCC username. So composite filings, this is where more than one grant is generated in a single FCC ID. So the new system will have composite devices submitted on one Form 731 by adding multiple equipment classes to the technical specifications line entry on the Form 731 tab. So when Form 731, one grant of certification covers the entire application. Another allowance, new allowance, will be that they will allow a new equipment class to be added with a permissive change filing. So currently that's not allowed. You're not allowed to add a new equipment class unless it's based on a rule change or, yeah. So the new system will have a new application purpose added. So that'll be a combined type of application, a change in FCC ID and Class 2 permissive change. They're going to combine those two together as well. You can still do one or the other, but there'll be a merge. So you'll be able to do a change in ID, Class 2 change with one application. And for change in FCC IDs, the Form 731 will have a new question regarding the original grantee's permission received. So we'll still need a permission letter from the original grantee if performing a change in FCC ID. So the pre-approval guidance process in the new system is initiated and completed in that same Form 731 filing. The process is no longer initiated in a KDB inquiry, and multiple PAG categories can be included in the same Form 731. There are new exhibit types. A new exhibit type is agent authorization, and the second exhibit type is a new policy requirement. There's a new policy requirement for all equipment requiring a declaration which will replace the signature we place on the online form. So the applicant will need to provide a declaration to confirm that the information provided to the FCC is true and correct, and the TCB has informed the grantee of their responsibilities with regard to accepting the grant. And that is required for every single Form 731. Another new exhibit type is, they're calling it the pre-approval guidance exhibit. So any proposed test plans or sensitive pre-grant information can be submitted within the PAG exhibit and is held confidential. The test report exhibit type is changed to be named test report /hack test report to cover either hack or radio test report type. And the FCC are merging the attestation and cover letter statements into one exhibit type. And the waiver information should also be included under that exhibit type. The block diagram, schematic, parts list, tune-up, operational description, these are all now merged into one exhibit type. So this allows you to include all confidential information in one exhibit for all of these elements. They're also increasing file size to 25 megabytes instead of 6 megabytes per attachment, and they now have they still have no limit on the number of attachments. So next, briefly, we'll look at an update on the mandatory IoT security laws in the U.S. So effective January 1st of this year, a new law is applicable in California under Senate Bill 327, requiring connected devices to be equipped with security features with specific, though, device type dependent requirements. Such as security features appropriate to the nature and function of the device, that the manufacturer has equipped the device with a reasonable security feature designed to protect the device and any information contained therein from unauthorized access or modification, destruction, and so on. On the right, you see there the state of Oregon has also passed House Bill 2395 requiring security measures for devices that cannot connect to the internet. So what are these security laws? So the laws are in place to protect users in the state of California and Oregon from harm, and it is state law, and ANAB, which is the ANSI National Accreditation Board, ANSI is the American National Standards Institute, they're considering countrywide security schemes for products. The requirements of this law are vague. For example, there's reasonable security feature. There are, however, mandatory requirements for IoT and wireless products, but some exceptions do exist. And some of the key definitions to be fluent in regards to IoT security are provided on this slide, including the definition of a connected device, which is any device that is able to connect to the internet. The definition of authentication, which is the ability to verify the right person is accessing the device. There's security features of a device to protect the integrity of the device. And finally, unauthorized access, which would be a compromise of the device that can trigger things such as, but not limited to, destruction, use, modification, or disclosure of information not authorized by the customer. So some examples of types of consumer products within the category of Internet of Things, IoT, includes, as you see on the left, some smart home automation devices, smart security, smart lighting, literally hundreds and thousands of devices that fall within this category. And in the future, all of these will be connected. It has been said that in future, devices of a certain cost, like $10, it's been said but not found to be true yet, will all have an IP address, and so they will be connected to the internet. There's also, on the right, you see industrial IoT products. So these would be like termed like smart factory devices, and there are millions of these devices are going to be as well. So these are deployed in factories, airplanes, automobiles, and these are outside of the home. Predominantly think of many different types of sensors and activity devices that are connected to one particular device. So a great deal of data is connected, and from this, various determinations or decisions can be made efficiently. So whereas IoT is more based around consumer, industrial IoT is focused around efficiency and business improvement. For example, sensors in a factory, there would be like, monitoring performance of a production line and such. So there's more efficiency and business improvement there. So the legislation does provide this information on what is considered to be reasonable security functions and features. So it shall be appropriate to the nature of the function of the device, to the information it may collect, contain, transmit, designed to protect the device and any information contained from unauthorized access, etc. The authentication must be outside of the local area network. The pre-programmed password must be unique to each device. And the device contains a security feature that requires a user to generate a new means of authentication before access is granted to the device for the first time. NIST 8259 is a standard applicable in the U.S. There is new legislation which was released under the California IoT Senate bill in relation to security law, and this requires IoT devices comply with the requirements. So similarly, in Europe, there is a draft EN 303645 standard that provides baseline protection provisions, and there are 13 key provisions within that, and some are mandatory, some recommended, some are conditional. So that closes the content portion of the webinar, and so now we can look at a few of the questions. And I think we only have about 2 minutes, so I might just be able to answer one or two.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Vina. If you would like to, if there's any questions that you would like to ask, as Vina said, we're just sort of conscious of the time. If we don't get round to answering your questions today, well, you can feel free to contact us directly, and we'll get back to you separately. I don't know, is there any there just now, Vina?
There are a couple.
Okay, you want to pick one?
Okay. There is one about the 3.7 to 4 gigahertz band. When will this band be allowed? And for that, the FCC has adopted rules last month, so that should be effective next month, about 2 months later. So there's a question on 6 gigahertz radio devices and what are the test requirements for those. And for that, this is a typically Rule Part 15 type of authorization, but the subsection of that actually depends on whether it's used indoor, outdoor, and there's different requirements and limits in the Part 15 rules for that frequency. So some 6 gigahertz devices, we would really need a description of that in order to determine, because ultra-wideband devices can also operate from around 6 to 7 gigahertz, and those, although they fall under Part 15F, there is an FCC tag required, and so a little bit more processing time involved in that. Maybe one more question. One just came through. What cybersecurity standards are used for certification? And as we said in this, for IoT, we will mostly be using NIST 8228 and 8259. And there's, for Europe, there is the draft EN 303645 standard. And for industrial, there's IEC 62443, and there's some others as well, but we can provide a more comprehensive answer on that in the follow-up after this. So thank you all for joining, and we will get back to you on all the questions.